If you will, take your Bibles, open them to the book of 1 John. 1 John, we're going to be in chapter 3 as we get started this morning. We got work to do, so get there. Let's do this. You guys ready? All right. I'm going to start in verse 11 and move through down to verse I think 24. Here we go. It says, "For this is the message you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another." Look down at verse 14. "We know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Everyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him. This is how we know that what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with action and in truth. This is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Dear friends, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have confidence before God and receive from him everything we ask because we keep his commands and do what pleases him. And this is his command, to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us." Oh, that's good. All right, let's stop there for today. So we're finishing up a series this morning that we've been doing for the first part of this year, where we're talking through the idea of change and chance and the fact that one letter changes everything, and sometimes one mentality about how you approach life can really change the way you move through life. And so some of us, when it comes to spiritual development or our spiritual formation, have just thought of this as a chance, meaning that I was just born into the right family in the right place and had the right experiences, and I just lucked out, like I was just like a leaf on the water of the stream of life, and it's just been, I just somehow found God along the way, and it's all just been good. And then others of us have adopted this scriptural worldview that is invoking the concept of you making some intentional decisions along the way about how you will develop your personal relationship with Christ. Meaning that you're moving from, hey, let's just see what happens, to let's make some decisions about how we will form our faith and how we will live that faith out. And that change, that mentality change, is at the very core of the concept of what it means to kind of grow up and to mature from like, hey, I found Christ, to I'm really in a deepening relationship with Christ. Those two things are different, right? Our passage this morning, check this out. What you know versus what you do is kind of a big deal within faith and within Christianity. Think about it over the years, even early on. This is the Apostle John, who is the longest living surviving one of the original 12, who is writing to churches in his old age about his experience with Christ. And think about he's so consumed with the concept of love and the love that Christ had for people. I mean, it just kind of oozes out of him, this concept of sacrificial love. And so he's constantly bringing it up. But think about what John's really saying at like this foundational level, right? He's really saying, what's going to happen, and what turns out to be so true, is that the church and people, and even people this day, we will divide over ideas. We will divide and draw battle lines over concepts, over ideas, over beliefs, over all that. And John's not downing that, and he's not saying that that's not important. What he is saying is that there is something even more important than that, and that's not just what we think, but what we do, right? Because we'll divide over what we think. Pick a subject, right? And we will divide over it. We will think about the church itself. For the first, after, 300 years or so of the church, they started having council after council and meeting after meeting and schism after schism and division after division. None of those divisions, the church did not call a meeting and go, hey, we got to agree to disagree and separate, and we're going to start a new movement over here and you guys stay over there and we're starting a new denomination and all that that didn't happen historically because people were loving each other too much. Right? It wasn't like they got together and were like, this is just too much love. We can't stand it. We got to leave, right? It was, hey, we have a different idea than your idea. We think differently than you think about whatever these words are or whatever the meaning behind these words are, and we're going to divide, right? Now, and we can't go back and fix all that, and we can't go back and do the legalese and figure out who is right and wrong, because the truth is a lot of those ideas they're just kind of blurry, and we're not really sure. But what, in John's mind, what you see in his writing is they're kind of peripheral, meaning that's not the core to him. All those things that sit on the periphery, the things that we end up usually dividing over, they're not really the main thing. And for John, the main thing is not just what you think, it's how you live in response to your experience with Christ. And that's about what you do, which is about love, right? So nobody's ever, even here, oh man, let's just have a moment, right? Even here, people come, people go. We get it. I tell people all the time, we're in the South. You can throw a rock and hit a church. So it's not like we don't have churches to go to. And one of the values. Okay, didn't plan on saying this. The elders love it when I do this. One of the values that here at the church that we kind of teach from the beginning on is we say, hey, we're about reaching people, not keeping people. And everybody gets all not keeping people. That should be our thing, right? We should get them in and keep them. And I'm always like, hey, at the end of the day, you can go to a lot of churches, right? And probably you can go to a lot of churches where the preaching's better to some extent. You can probably go to a lot of churches where maybe the music or the show's better. They probably have laser lights at some of the places. You can probably find those, and a Vogue machine, and you just find a lot of stuff, right? But church, at the end of the day, and maybe most of the time that people have kind of migrated in and out of here, it's really been about belief. It's really been about I don't like, Mike believes this and I don't believe that, or the elders believe this and I don't believe that, or so-and-so. I was sitting next to a Democrat in church and it was crazy. It's like a whole thing, right? It's like I believe and I believe and I believe. But here's the deal. What John is saying is something completely different. John is saying, hey, at the end of the day, what the life in response to Christ is about is not about just what you hold to be true, but it's how you live out what you hold to be true. It is what you do with it that really matters. And I have not had anybody that's literally like, I'm leaving because you have done too much good here, right? You've been too loving and too caring. I'm out. It's never happened, not once. Are you with me? And it shouldn't happen. And we should focus on. Okay, never mind. Here we go. All right, let's get into it. Here you go. Let's just look at a couple of these passages together. And this is his command: to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he commanded us. That's the basis. This is what John's saying. This is his command. Jesus' command is very simple, and especially to Jews who would have been listening to this at the time of John's writing. He's like, I know that you know a lot of commands. I know there's a lot of rules. I know there's a lot of stuff in the Old Testament. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff, but Jesus has narrowed it down to one thing, and the only thing that truly matters is love God and love people. That's the deal. Think about that little encounter that he has with his closest disciples at Philippi, and Peter says, he says, who do you say that I am? Peter says, you're the Son of God. You're the one. You're the guy, right? And he says, okay, then great. I'm so glad you figured that out. You nailed it, Peter. We're going to build this whole thing on that concept, the identity of who I am. And let me tell you how we're going to do this. You're going to live out the same love that I'm showing you. It's literally what he says. This is the foundation, not just what you believe, but what we're going to do with it. Watch what I've done. Every disciple that he calls, he constantly says, come, follow me. He doesn't say, come, let's argue about it. Come, let me tell you all my beliefs. Come, let me educate you. It's come, follow me. You got to see this. You got to see what I'm about to do with this. It's pretty good. Go back to verse 11. Look at this. For this is the message you heard from the beginning. You should love one another. This is the message you heard from the beginning, that you should love one another. He's like, look, the whole world was changed. Think about this. The whole world was changed. When John's writing this letter, he's writing to a church that's just starting to mature, and it's spreading all over the Mediterranean world. But from the very beginning, the thing that changed everything wasn't what they believed. It was what they did for one another. That's what changed everything. The reason the Church of Jesus Christ explodes on the historical scene and takes over a world that is full of polytheism and a Judeo mindset that had gotten corrupted by really, like this legalistic approach to God. The reason Christianity explodes on the scene, it is propelled by the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the love that his followers displayed to the people in their world. That's why it explodes. It wasn't exploding onto the scene because they were like, we know so much. We just need to tell you how much we know, right? It wasn't exploding on the scene. People aren't like giving their lives away and at the risk of death because they're like, they have all the right answers. They were like, dude, these people, the way they treat each other is so different from everything that we've seen up into this point, right? And so that's the powerful deal. Look at verse 16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. And I think that when we read that, it reminds us that love's going to take a little bit from us, right? And so I get people that usually ask questions like this all the time. But I got my own problems. Doesn't charity start at home? And shouldn't I fix me first? And I get that, right? Like that's usually the absolute resistant mentality. Anytime we start talking about what it means for you to like live out a life of love, and it's like, yeah, I'll do that to the people that I do love in my life and my family. But because think about it, what was happening was people were accepting Christ and his teaching and his example, and then Christ was telling them to go out and love their enemies. Go out and love the people that were tough to love in life. The guy at work that just is so annoying, right? Like, go out and love that guy, right? Go out and love the people that you have to live with that see things completely different than you. I mean, Republicans and Democrats, all together, and cats and dogs. It's amazing, right? Like, okay. So I just think you look at this and people start going, yeah, but doesn't it start at home? And shouldn't we figure this out? And like, it's going to take... I don't want to focus on me. I got to get better with me before I start helping other people, right? We celebrated Jenny Seacrest's memorial service last night, and it was a beautiful time. It was a beautiful time. It was quite something. Lots and lots of people that she touched that were gathered here and celebrating her life. And she, for those that are just tuning in on this, if you're here at the Vine, you've been living under a rock if you've missed this. But Jenny lost a 4-year, body just gave out on a 4-year battle with cancer. But we were spending so much time last night. The speakers were so amazing. The brothers that shared, the friends that shared, they were just so amazing, pointing out that the physicality and the bodies give out, but her spirit was just so enduring in this and just so full of faith and just so amazing as she carried out just an example and a testimony and a witness for what faith looks like in the life of an individual. It was powerful. Like, it was a moment last night. Like, it was better than anything I'm going to say today. It was a moment. Like, we had it going last night. But I just think about this because I shared this last night. I just want to share it with you guys because I went back and found it. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do last night because it's like, dude, how do you articulate a life, right? But Jenny she'd done a better job than I had done, and so I just went back and took old Facebook posts of Jenny and just let her share the message for her own memorial because her words were just so powerful. Right. And so this is from February 27th, 2019. This is 3.5 more years into this struggle. And this was a tough time. And it was nearing the end, the beginning of this year. And she said this. She said, sitting here waiting for scans this morning, and I've got a lot of time on my hands. I can pray for you. What's going on in your life? Message me if you want to keep it private. And I remember reading this I read this last night, and I was like, That's crazy, right? You got stage 4 cancer, and you're like, hey, how can I pray for you? Tell me about your life. What's going on? There's this outward. That's what happens when somebody has a personal relationship with Christ and is growing and intentional about their growth. What happens is something crazy. Is they start not just being consumed with their own stuff and their own shortcomings and their own problems and their own fears. They are literally thinking outflow. It just never stops. This is what was so contagious about what was taking place at this time that the church is exploding, 300 AD. It's exploding onto the scene because people are like, who would do that, right? Who would think this way with all that going on in their life? Who would be at a chemo appointment going, how can I pray for you? You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's a powerful example of what the love of Christ looks like when it's lived out. And here's the funny thing. I said this last night. I looked back to this post. People wrote her and asked for prayers. I was like, what are you doing? That's insane, right? But people get it. The other Christians are like, we get it too. And thank you for asking. And they wrote in and requested prayers, and she prayed for them. And I'm like, that's like, wow. Like, that's a powerful example of what the body of Christ looks like when Christ sets in and people grow up in their faith, and all of a sudden, like, the love of Christ starts oozing out of the life of an individual, right? I mean, think about that. Like, we can divide, we can have differences of opinion, you can leave churches and go to other churches and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when you see this kind of stuff, this kind of stuff never divides. This kind of stuff pulls crazy groups together, right? People of all different backgrounds. It was a good night last night. People of all different backgrounds and all different mindsets all coming together and going, that life was awesome, right? That was awesome. She said this, February 22nd. She said, I just want God to use me where I am, and I know that he can still do that. And so we met, and we were having coffee one day, and she was like, I just feel like, I just feel like I'm sitting around, I'm not doing anything. And I'm like, Jen, you got to give your body a chance to like work through this. And she's like, yeah, I just feel like I got to do something. And I said, start a small group. You know what I'm saying? You got all that time during the day. People that are off there, they don't come meet with you. And she's like, okay. And I was like, so she started a small group, and they met at the park sometimes, and they met at Susan's Cafe, and they got together and had prayer, and she led the small group, and she was part of that meeting, and different women were gathering at that meeting. I mean, who does that, right? Like, who does that when they're that sick, when they're that at a place of brokenness? Well, I tell you who did that. People who have a personal relationship with Christ. They get that there's more in the here and now than just the here and now. They get that there's more than just whatever problem they see, whatever pain they have before them. They do this thing that's absolutely sacrificial and deep and just beyond what we typically see in the world. It's so different than what we see, and it's attractive, and it's like, God, man, I want some of that. John goes on, he says this. Dear children, let us love with words or speech. Let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and truth. Look at that. Think about what John's saying. And James says the same thing in the book of James, chapter 1 and chapter 2. He's like, shut up and do some good. He literally says the words like, you should stop talking and take care of widows and orphans. That's what you should start doing. Take care of some widows and orphans, and then you can talk, right? Because here's the deal. Nobody divides over taking care of widows and orphans. Nobody divides over loving the strangers. Nobody divides over caring for those who are in need, right? So, like, nobody says, I'm leaving this church. They care for too many orphans. Nobody does that. That's what John's saying. He's saying all these things that we're dividing over, they're peripheral. They're on the edge. They don't, at the end of the day, they matter, but do they really, right? Like, when Christ takes hold of the life, and I get that belief is important. I get there's some doctrinal things important. You know that. We spend a lot of time on that. But, like, at the end of the day, there's a point in which what we do really matters, and how the outflow of faith really matters. And that's what John's pointing at. I mean, look at those words. Let us not love with just words or speech, right? But with actions and in truth, Or how about this? Look at this, verse 17. If anyone has material possessions, this is where the rubber meets the road, okay? You ready? This is where it gets practical. We're not just talking ethereal anymore. This isn't just like you go off and love pie in the sky. Like, I just love people, right? This is not that, ready? If you have material possessions, John goes on to say, if that wasn't practical enough, and see your brother and sister in need and have no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Ooh, okay. Probably need to take a moment with that. Take that in for just a second. If you have material possessions, John says, and you see a brother or sister in need, and you don't do anything about it, you should probably ask yourself, is the love of God really there? Because when people the love of God gets a hold of a person, it really does change the way they move through life. And this is so scary to Western, like, think about it. I guess if you were living in the East and you were communist or whatever, you'd be used to it. But like, this is very scary, right? To Western, affluent people. Like, we just have to admit that. Like, this is not our best verse. Like, we're like, ooh, okay, that would be me. Because compared to the rest of the world, we all have something. And so, if you have material possessions and you see somebody in need, think about what John's writing to. He's writing to her in a time when Christians were being persecuted, and some of them were being, ixed out of the economy that they were a part of and the cities that were a part of. Think about Ephesus at the time. Literally, there's Christian communities that were not able to buy, sell, and trade in the community because of their belief. And John's like, you got to take care of each other. Christians have to take care of each other. They have to take care of the people that are in need. And if you have things and you have material possessions, you see a brother in need, you got to take care of those brothers that are in need. And when that happens, that is a beautiful thing, right? When we read things like this, it usually comes up with a bunch of excuses. We start telling stuff. What could I really do to help the world's problems, right? What could I really do? My little bit of possessions, would that really even make a dent in the world's problems? That's typically what we tell ourselves. I love Andy Stanley's response to that. He just says this. Next slide, look at it. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. How good is that? Do for one what you wish you could do. If you look at the world's problems, you won't do anything ever, right? You'll say, here I am with my little bit. How could I possibly do anything? But here's the thing. That's not the teaching of Christ. So the teaching of Christ was, hey, when you are confronted with somebody who is in need, and you can meet that need, you should do it. You should do it. Just meet the need, right? And I promise you, there's something about putting one step in front of the other when it comes to that's powerful. It's powerful. Look at this real quick. This gets heavy. See a brother and sister in need and have no pity on them. This is an interesting phrase. Hold on just for a second. I'll call for these, Jay, so we go through this. But check this out. That's just part of that phrasing. If you see your brother and sister in need and have no pity on them. This is the worst translation of the Bible here, and I know we do this every now and then, but this is the worst translation. This is the NIV. I'm an NIV person. I just grew up in the NIV, so I default to it. But this NIV translation here, it's just they weaned out. They just completely chickened out from the translation because the translation is much more ruthless and raw and like slightly disturbing than that, uncomfortable, right? And so we're gonna get into the uncomfortable for just a moment. Here's your Greek words for this little phrase here about having no pity, right? Kaleo splonchnon, right? This is the two Greek words, kaleo splonchnon. Here's the interesting thing. The Greek words means this: shut bowel. Right? And so the translator's like, we're just going to skip that, right? Like, that's a little too much. Like a shut bowels, or like, nobody wants to talk about that, at least publicly. Nobody. Think about it. If you're at a dinner party and somebody goes, hey, let me talk to you about my constipation. Like, nobody says that, right? Like, nobody says, hey, I've been having some incontinence. Nobody says that, right? It's just not typical public consumption. So what happens is the translators get to this part in the scripture and they go, shut bowel. Like, nobody wants to hear that. Let's just ease that into like, hey, have no pity on them, even though none of those words are in the actual text. Let me show you the King James version, and this is the 1611 King James version, so this is like the old school when they still had guts to translate it. Here you go. It says, think about this. This is all the weird words, right? But whoso hath, right, his world's goods and sees his brother have need and shutteth up his bowels of compassion. Much better translation, right? Shutteth up his bowels of compassion. That is good, isn't it? If you shutteth up your bowels of compassion. All right, go back. Let me see that. Go there. From him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? Shutteth up his bowels of compassion. Okay, yeah, put that up there. Shutteth up his bowels. I mean, think about what he's saying. I hesitate to say what he's saying, because what he's saying, if we put that into modern English, would be probably too rough for the church to handle. I know we're still getting there, but he's saying, if you say you're full of God and his love, and you see someone in need, and it's a need that you could easily meet, you're full of something, but it's not God. That's exactly what he's saying. I kid you not, that is what he is saying. The translators did us no service taking that out of there, because it is so much more in your face than the translators made it. You're full of something, but it's not God. I mean, that is powerful, and that's what John's saying, and I think he's frustrated. I think he looks at a church, and he's like, hey, there's this rumor going around that you can have the love of God and it be in your mind, but never acted upon. That is a lie. The love of God either oozes out of you or it does not, right? It's probably not there. That's powerful. Verse 23. And this is his command. Let's go back to the beginning. And this is his command: to believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and to love one another as he has commanded. Think about it, as he has commanded, and as he showed us as an example. And remember, his example was that he laid down his life, which means love is probably going to cost you something. I think one of the reasons we don't even act in love many times is because it's going to cost us something, and it's a scary deal to act in love. You ever have one of these deals where, like, I had a moment even last night. You ever have one of these deals where you're confronted with a relationship that for whatever reason has gone bad? It's just gone bad, right? Maybe it was their fault. Maybe it was your fault. Maybe you're not willing to admit it's your fault. Maybe they're not willing to admit it's their fault. Maybe it was both your fault. I don't know. It's gone bad. And it's been easy because they've been out of sight, out of mind. Like, they're just kind of not there. So when they're not there, you don't think about it. And then all of a sudden, for whatever social gathering or social reason, you have to see them. And in that moment, you're like, oh, crap, here we go, right? Because I know there's an issue here. They know there's an issue here. But we're not going to talk about it because that would be, what? Too hard, right? It may be emotional. I may have to admit that I had responsibility. Or they may have to admit, or I don't know how they're going to react. And not knowing how they're going to react, that scares me a little bit. It may turn ugly, and so I'm not going to do anything, right? It's paralyzing, relationally speaking. And that can be true in marriages, that can be true with friends, that can be true with coworkers, that can be true in all these different areas of life. And so at the moment when we should be dealing with, like, we should be going, okay, Christ has called me to love, even love these people that have wronged me. And for whatever reason, I assess this person as wronging me and not dealing with it correctly. I should probably approach and deal with this person, but I'm not going to do it because it's just scary to do all that. It's easier for me to go home and not think about it, or try not to think about it till the next time I see him at some social gathering. Are you with me? To that, I just think that at some point, you have to decide, you have to be intentional. You have to press in. That's a chance versus change, a chance versus change kind of deal. Like, it's probably not going to just get better. Time probably won't heal it. It probably just won't, like, you won't just be like, never address it, and one day they'll call and go, you want to go to the movies? It's not going to happen. Like, you'll have to be intentional. You'll have to decide. You'll have to be the one to go, I got to be bigger here. I got to try here. I got to step out in faith here. I got to pray about this and then approach this person with a sense of humility and have the discussion. And I got to do it in love, and I got to extend them love even if they've been the one that wronged me, right? But that takes, like, so much emotional work and spiritual work. It'll cost you something. Love always does. I read this last night in Revelation chapter 21. John has one of these lists where he describes who's going to go into the lake of fire, which that's scary enough, right? You're going in the lake of fire, right? The lake of fire is this picture of judgment that John sees in this revelation that he's been given by God of what's to come and how God will make things right in the world. And we can talk about all the ins and outs of that later. But he, like all these other disciples, make these lists. You know, Paul's famous for these lists. He got a couple in 1 Corinthians and one in Romans and one in Timothy. And he just makes these lists. And then John comes along and makes these lists too. It's kind of the other way of saying, you know, there's certain people that are headed towards a lifestyle, a life of death. They're not really living, they're existing, and they're kind of just moving through space and time, but they're really dying. They're living out a life of corruption and death. And when you look at this list, this is pretty good. Look at this list for just a second. When you read this list, at first you go, yeah. I read this list and I was like, yeah, okay. You know what I mean? Like, you look unbelieving. Well, you're out. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Sorcerers, of course, they're going. Lake of fire, send them, right? Who wants them? And, you know, the abominable, the idolaters. Yeah, I mean, you got to be out too. It gets a little bit crazier as we get down here. Murderers. Then you get the liars. You're like, well, okay, don't know. I think I've done that before, but maybe there's forgiveness and grace for some of that, right? And the sexually immoral, oh, well, you know, it's like everybody in America's like, that could be tough, right? I don't know what that entails. How much does that entail? We get a little worried about that. But, I mean, this list is, for the most part, we look at this and we're like, yep, send them. They got to go. Here's the interesting thing, and I said this last night. You know, I leave one out here because the one that I leave out is so crazy. The very first one that John puts on the list, you know what it is? The cowardly. Oh, I know, right? Like, when you read that, it's like, I mean, some of us were literally just like born a little bit like with a yellow streak on our back. Like, we approach life with a little bit of like, hey, I'd rather just avoid, and not address. The cowardly are on this. They're on the lake of fire list, like the cowardly. Like, think about what John's actually saying here, which is powerful. He's saying that cowardliness, or maybe in reverse, I don't know how you'd put that in reverse. So let's say confidence. I don't know, what word would you say the opposite of boldness? Okay, bold is a virtue. That's a virtue. That means that in John's mindset, one of the virtues of a believer is a sense of boldness. And so he's referring to cowardliness in the concept, in the understanding, in the arena of virtue. We don't usually think of that. And like, when I saw that, I spent some time with that this week, I was going, cowardliness. I've done some cowardly things in my life, right? Like, cowardliness? What is it about that seems pretty scary? Because here's the thing. I think that when you do make a personal relationship with Christ and you start to grow in that relationship, he takes you to some places that you didn't think you were going to go relationally. I think he takes you to some places in the experiences of your life. I mean, I have conversations with people all the time. Most of the time, when you have a pastor or a seasoned Christian having a conversation with someone that's either brand new or hasn't made the decision yet that they really want to be in, responding to Christ's teaching, they kind of look at most of the things that you have adopted as your virtues, things that you're doing, and they look at you like you're a little crazy, Like you say, oh, what are you doing about, I heard that you guys all go to church and you give or you serve or you do, and they just look at you like, are you nuts, right? Like, the outflow factor to them is almost shocking, right? And then you hear about people who do these extravagant acts of relational love, right? They forgive people who've wronged them in deep ways that are like exponentially grander than just, I got slighted at work or so-and-so gossiped about me. Like, deep ways. I've seen people forgive people for all crazy, molestation and murder and some really deep things, and Christians release that and bring forgiveness and confront their offenders and all this stuff. And I go, that's like the strength, the boldness that it takes to do those sorts of things. Like, when Christ is in someone, like, they are the boldness that it takes to live that out. Wow. You know what I'm saying? It's most of us, I think, when you outside of Christ, I think the default setting, if Christ wasn't in the picture, if Christ didn't dwell in the life of the believer, I think the default setting would just be cowardliness, wouldn't it? It'd just be like, easier not to deal with that. Easier not to think about that. Easier not to confront that. Easier not to have that conversation. Easier not to do any of that. Easier to sit and wallow in my own mess than to deal with any of that. That's the reality. That's one of the things that stuck out to me so much in this journey with Jenny over this last year is she's just, even as time approached, and I think many people in her circle, whether it be friends, and I think maybe sometimes the family, there's this sense of communal denial. Like none of us want to let ourselves believe that we're getting closer and closer and closer to the end of our time here. And so there's this kind of communal design. It's not just, it's many of us. I think it's all of us. I think it's me included. Like just like, well, block it out, block it out, block it out. But see, pastoral one-on-one conversations that deal with mortality, it's so much more brutal than that, right? So there's these one-on-one talks, and we're talking through mortality issues. I remember I would come home after a day of work where I'd had a meeting with Jenny, and my wife would say, "How was your day?" And I'd go, "I had a meeting with Jenny," and she'd go, "Oh, I get it," because there was this exhaustion that would take place in those conversations, because it was like, oh man, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, man, like as we deal with this. But the one thing that stuck out to me that was so informative to me as we did this journey was there was never a point of fear for her. Like, yes, there was sorrow, and yes, there was like, hey, I'm going to miss some things, and yes, the kids, and yes, this. There were all that question stuff we did. But there was this real peace and abiding strength. We prayed about that peace. She spoke about that peace. We focused on that peace. There was a sense of like, hey, to God be the glory. To God be the glory. To God be the glory. Peace, peace, peace. Strength, strength, strength. A sense of focus. How does that happen? That happens when Christ dwells in an individual and is constantly speaking to their spirit saying, you got nothing to worry about. You got to trust me. You got to just rest in me. You got to just trust me that I've got a plan here, even when you don't see it, even when we don't see it. Are you with me? Okay. Real quick. This year, as we kind of start off the year and talk about what's to come, we focused on some things corporately that we want to kind of encourage you with corporately. One, we want to do more mission work this year than ever before. We want to have more volunteers. We want to have more consistent contributors, and we want to do more small groups than we've ever done. So even today, we have a new vertical marriage small group that starts in second service. Couples will be getting together talking about how to better their marriages. We got small groups that are starting this month in different parts of town. If you want to join a small group, you can still do that. One of the things that we want to do is expand some volunteering here at the church. Listen, let's just be honest, right? Everything that we're talking about today is exemplified in places of volunteerism, meaning that at some point you start sharing the gifts and talents and abilities that you have in places here at the body, and you give yourself away a little bit. And, it seems almost trivial compared to what I just described to you, but yes, we do that. This whole thing runs on a sense of volunteerism, meaning that when you show up to church and you drop off your kids and you want them to have a great children's ministry experience and grow in the knowledge of Christ, that only happens when there's great volunteers. Right? You want to show up and see the images on the screen and the lights work and the carpet be cleaned and the chairs be cleaned and all that kind of stuff. That only happens when volunteers are in place. And so we want you to find a place to volunteer here at the church, and we encourage you to do that this year. Last thing that I just want to encourage you on this year that you need to know now in order to prep for. I want to take as many volunteers as I can. This year with me. Our foreign mission project is in Honduras. We're working on a new project, brand new project in Honduras. We started this year. It's a raw piece of land that will ultimately get turned into an orphanage. And so we start that this year, but it'll take a ton more than we've ever done before. It's a huge lift this year that we start. Like, this will be probably a 10-year project, and it'll take a huge team to get it launched and started this year. And so if we normally take 15 to 20, we'll have to take 40, this year. There'll be a big lift that we got to get going. So that trip we've scheduled for the middle of October. I can't give you the exact dates just because the flight schedule from the airline isn't out yet, but I think it'll probably be around the end of the second week and beginning of the third week in October. I'm just be honest with you, the total, meaning that it's kind of like a all-inclusive cruise, right? On this trip, right? Everything. That's all your meals, all your airfare, all your hotel stay, all of your travel costs, everything. You don't need to bring a dime. It's all-inclusive. It's almost like sandals. That trip will run you about $1,200. It's not a cheap trip. We expect that we do no fundraising for that. No fundraising for that. We expect that you do that as part of your personal sacrifice. I know that sounds strong, but we just believe that mission work should be that way. That includes me. I've never, ever asked you to pay for my trip. I've never taken money to go on this trip from this congregation. We always pay our own way. Everybody pays their own way. Okay? But we'll need a huge lift. That's in October this year. And the deposits for that are $400, and they have to come in by Easter. So you have to have it in by Easter, just as you're making your mental notes. And I tell you all that in advance just to say, because you got to plan. I get that you have to plan. You got stuff going on in your life, you got to plan. And so if you're interested in doing that this year, you've got about 6 weeks to kind of start raising your deposit, and then you've got another couple of months, many months there before we actually take off. The last part of that payment isn't due until a couple weeks out before we leave. And so just so that you know, that's coming up, and we need a big group to go this year. And if you're like, what would I do? Trust me, we'll figure out something. It'll be fine. You'll be digging a ditch or something, but it'll be great, and it'll all be unto the Lord, and you'll be a part of building something that will change lives for years and years and years to come, that you'll get to see the images of students. Man, I'm Facebook friends. This is crazy. I should have put this. I'm going to put this in second service. This is crazy. I am now Facebook friends and have Facebook message conversations with kids that man, this is crazy. Danny Davis and I and Sarah Cook and I got in a van on the first trip 15 years ago, and we put a 3-year-old. We picked up a 3-year-old in one town, this little town outside of La Ceiba, and took him to an orphanage where he stayed, and he just now graduated from high school and is off. Like, think about that. That's crazy. When we picked this kid, it was crazy. We were not ready for that. Let me just tell you. I had never been to a third world country, and we weren't ready to see starving kids. It was an intense deal. And so put this kid in a van and took him to an orphanage that he stayed at, and we say every time the group goes down, if you have a new person on the group, they're always like, hey, this is crazy. I didn't think it was going to be this way. But the kids in the orphanage have it made. And I'm like, I know. Like, literally, once they get there, it's constant love, it's constant community, it's constant discipleship, it's constant education. It is like they get everything. You know what I'm saying? It's a beautiful, beautiful sight. It's a beautiful thing. And so sometimes we look at that and we go, man, it's awesome. And so he got there, and we literally took him in the van, and he sat on my lap, and we took him for another 2.5 hours and put him in this orphanage for the rest of his adolescence. That's crazy. Now we're Facebook friends. He messaged me the other day. I was like, hey, Glaze, what's up, man? You have Facebook? This is crazy. So it's crazy. So that's the kind of thing that happens, and we want you to experience it, and we want you to be a part of that. And so that's coming up. And if you'd like to be a part of that, we'd love to have you. And so we want to let you know now. Will it take sacrifice? Yes. Could you do something better with the money for yourself? Probably not. Could you come up with 1 billion reasons why you shouldn't do that and shouldn't extend yourself that way and shouldn't give yourself away in that way? Yes, you can come up with some reasons. But when the love of Christ takes hold in a person, those little excuses probably just go to the wayside, and people start to love in a way that they haven't before. We'd ask you to consider it. Would you take a moment and let's pray, and then we'll wrap up the service. Father, we give thanks for a time to come and seek your face and put our hope and trust in you. And I pray thanks for the testimony and life of Jenny Seacrest, who has been a great example to the people in her life about how to live and honor you in courage, facing down even her own mortality with courage and grace and peace. may we do the same. In some ways, Father, I think it's even tougher to live out the rest of our days giving ourselves away in sacrifice every day, every moment, responding in love. And so give us the strength, the mindset, the passion, the awareness to do those sorts of things. Impress it upon us, Father. Live through us as we give ourselves away for you. We ask it in your name. I want to take just a few moments. You can think about that and think about the courage factor in your life the Holy Spirit is calling you towards. And when you're ready, come and receive communion. There'll be folks up my left and my right ready to pray with you, over you, for you if you need it. If you want to make a first-time decision and choose Him, they're here, they're ready. Take a moment. When you're ready, you